My name is Thaddeus, and I used to be a night shift truck driver. It wasn't a job I particularly loved, but it paid the bills. Driving through the dark, lonely highways of rural America, I often found myself alone with my thoughts, the hum of the engine, and the endless stretch of road. The isolation was something I'd grown used to, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened on one fateful night. It was a moonless night, and I was hauling a load of construction equipment from a small town in Nebraska to a site in Colorado. The route took me through desolate back roads, areas where cell phone reception was a myth and the nearest town could be an hour away. The company's policy required drivers to take breaks every few hours, but I was running late and decided to push through, hoping to make up for lost time. Around midnight, I saw a figure standing on the side of the road, illuminated by the dim glow of my headlights. It was unusual to see anyone out here, and my initial reaction was to keep driving. But as I got closer, I saw it was a young woman, probably in her 20s, looking desperate and frightened. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" I asked. "Please," she replied, her voice trembling. "My car broke down, and there's no signal out here." I hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Hop in." She climbed into the passenger seat, her hands shaking. "Thank you so much. I don't know what I would have done." "No problem," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "Where are you headed?" "Anywhere but here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She introduced herself as Serafina, and while she was polite, she didn't offer much information about herself. I asked a few questions, trying to make conversation, but her answers were vague and non-committal. The road stretched on, and the silence between us grew heavier. I glanced at her occasionally, noting how she kept looking out the window, as if expecting something or someone to appear. "Is everything all right?" I finally asked. She turned to me, her eyes wide and filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Do you believe in ghosts, Thaddeus?" Her question caught me off guard. "Ghosts? Not really." "Why?" "Because," she said, her voice trembling again, "I think something is following us." I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see another vehicle behind us, but the road was empty. "What do you mean, following us?" "It's hard to explain," she said, her voice barely audible. "Ever since my car broke down, I've felt this presence. It's like someone's watching me, waiting for the right moment." I felt a chill run down my spine, but forced a laugh. "You've probably just had a rough night. We'll get you to a town, and everything will be fine." But even as I said the words, I didn't believe them. The air inside the cab seemed to grow colder, and an inexplicable sense of dread settled over me. I kept driving, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror more frequently. About an hour passed, and the uneasy silence was broken by a sudden, loud thud. The truck swerved slightly, and I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my heart pounding. "What the hell was that?" "I told you," Serafina whispered. "It's here." I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking. "Stay here," I told her, though I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I stepped out of the truck and walked around to the back, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. At first, I saw nothing unusual, but then I noticed a set of footprints leading away from the truck, bare footprints, too large to be Serafina's. A sense of panic welled up inside me. I hurried back to the cab and jumped in, slamming the door shut. "We need to go," I said, my voice trembling. "Now." Serafina didn't argue. I started the engine and pulled back onto the road, the sense of being watched growing stronger with each passing mile. As the night wore on, the feeling of dread intensified. I kept glancing at the mirrors, convinced I'd see something lurking in the shadows. Serafina remained silent, staring straight ahead, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. It wasn't until we reached a stretch of road flanked by dense woods that I saw a dark figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt mere feet from the apparition. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring at us with hollow eyes. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, and beside me, Serafina let out a strangled sob. "We have to get out of here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. But before I could shift the truck into reverse, the figure began to move. It floated toward us, its form becoming more defined, a man, tall and gaunt, with an expression of pure malice. In a desperate bid to escape, I threw the truck into reverse and floored the gas pedal. The truck lurched backward, but the figure continued to advance. The cab filled with a cold, oppressive air, and I could hear a low, guttural whispering, like a chorus of lost souls. Serafina turned to me, her eyes wide with terror. "There's only one way to stop it," she said. "We have to confront it." I didn't understand, but I knew we had no other choice. I stopped the truck and got out, Serafina following close behind. The figure was closer now, its features clearer. It was an older man, his face twisted in rage and sorrow. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice shaking. The figure paused, its eyes locking onto mine. "You," it whispered, "you took her from me." Confused and terrified, I turned to Serafina. "What is he talking about?" Serafina stepped forward, her face pale. "I didn't mean to," she said, her voice breaking. "It was an accident." The figure's expression softened slightly, but the anger remained. "You must pay for what you've done." Serafina explained that she had been involved in a car accident years ago that resulted in the death of the man's daughter. She had been driving drunk, and though she was never caught, the guilt had haunted her ever since. She believed the spirit of the man had been following her, seeking revenge. "I'm sorry," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry." The figure seemed to waver, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. "Sorry won't bring her back," it said, its voice filled with sorrow. Realizing what needed to be done, I stepped forward. "What can we do to make this right?" I asked, my voice steady. The figure stared at us for a long moment before speaking. "You must acknowledge your guilt. You must atone." Serafina fell to her knees, sobbing. "I'm so sorry. I've lived with this guilt every day. Please, let me make it right." The figure seemed to grow taller, its eyes burning with an otherworldly light. "You must go to the place where it happened. You must confess." I helped Serafina to her feet, and we got back into the truck. Following her directions, we drove to a bridge on the outskirts of a nearby town, the site of the accident. As we stood on the bridge, Serafina broke down, recounting the events of that fateful night. She cried, pleaded for forgiveness, and for the first time, truly confronted the horror of what she had done. As Serafina spoke, the air around us grew warmer, and the oppressive feeling began to lift. The figure appeared one last time, its expression softer, almost peaceful. "Thank you," it whispered. "Now, I can rest." With that, the figure vanished, leaving us alone on the bridge. Serafina collapsed, her body racked with sobs, but I could see the weight of her guilt had finally begun to lift. We drove back in silence, the road ahead no longer filled with the same sense of dread. The first light of dawn was breaking on the horizon, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a sense of peace. In the weeks that followed, Serafina sought help for her drinking and began working with a support group for people affected by drunk driving. She was determined to make amends, to honor the life that had been lost. I continued my night shifts, but I was no longer haunted by the memories of that night. I had faced true horror and come out the other side. And though the road ahead was still long and uncertain, I knew that we had both found a measure of redemption. Sometimes, when I drive through the quiet, moonlit roads, I think of the figure on the bridge and the young woman who found the strength to face her past. And I know that no matter how dark the night, there is always the possibility of light. If you want to see more horror stories, please like the video, share your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Stay with us, thank you, and see you in the next videos.